Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Isaiah. We are covering chapter 25 today, but for our purposes, I need to move back just a few lines above where we ended yesterday in chapter 24. For the Lord of hosts will rule or take dominion on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. These are words that ends chapter 24 as a symbol of hope that God Himself will take His throne on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, thereby signifying the temple. That's how this text is understood. And with this, it leads us to chapter 25. And when we go to chapter 25 onwards, you find that much of what is spoken is about not just the land, but the people of the land. And God has a lot to say about them. Now, chapter 25, when we begin, comes about as an idea of praise that Isaiah emits or evokes. He says, "O Jehovah," this is the name of God. He says, "You are my Elohim." And then he goes on to say, "I will exalt you. I will praise your name, for you have done wonderful things. Your counsels of all are faithfulness and truth." And we need to break this out a little bit. First of all, understand that much of what we read in the English language is masked by modern day English words. And the fact that the translators are expected to use as few words as possible to translate the Hebrew language, which is an ancient language. So we begin, some of the things that you would notice by now is that this capital L, capital O, capital R, and capital D does not exist in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is the Yod He Vav He, which could be represented as a transliteration as the YHVH that I've been writing down. And it is the name of God. And so, one of the rules of translation, which has been broken all the way through in many English translations, is that the translator has translated the name of God rather than transliterated the name of God, because the name of God is in Hebrew. Now, strangely, you find that many names in the Hebrew language or the Hebrew Bible that we read are actually transliterated. Now, what does that mean? For example, we have this idea of transliteration versus translation. Now, our chapter is short today, so I'll spend some time explaining some of these terminology. Transliteration is really to take the name and represent it in the modern language. For example, the Yod He Vav He, it's transliterated as Yod He Vav He. So each letter, for example, this is the Yod, the He, the Vav, and then the He. So that is basically demonstrating to us, when we are not Hebrew readers, that, oh, okay, it is a Hebrew name and that is how it is spelled. But the translation would be to represent this into something else. And so the Lord is used throughout the New King James and many of the translations, but that is not the meaning of Yod He Vav He. That's what I mean. Now, in some other names, for example, we have this This word would be a very familiar word. This word here is David. Now, David, or David, as we say it in the English, is the D, the V, and the D, but it's pronounced as David, and it comes out quite well in the transliteration. And so there is no translation for David. And you find this as commonplace, where sometimes it is translated and sometimes it's transliterated. So, for our purposes, I'm suggesting to you that when you go and read your Bibles, that you should read it in the transliterated form for the names. So, you are my God. Now, this is another one that we need to spend a little bit explaining. This word is Elohim, and it is spelled something like this, right? Hmm, Probably not this. And it is transliterated as Elohim. So this is a transliteration. The translation is God. And so what we have here is a translation, and we have missed the meaning of Elohim. Basically, the word Elohim is very similar to the Chinese word Shen, where you find that it does not necessarily represent God, but someone who is very powerful, very great, very mighty. So a king is an Elohim, a judge is an Elohim. They're so powerful, they can actually decide on your life and death. Angels are Elohim, and also idols, because it is a representation or a misrepresentation of God Himself. So, this is a very broad word. And in this case, the word is used as an all encompassing the mighty one of God, that God is the mighty creator, the mighty, the one who has power to judge and to punish and to destroy and also to create and to make. And so the praise of Isaiah is to call on to God, not just any Lord. For example, in today's world, every God is called a Lord. But in the context of the Hebrew Bible that we are covering, O Lord, as in the capital L, capital O, capital R, and capital D, it is the Yod He Vav He, and I've suggested that the name would be Jehovah, very similar to the Chinese sound in the Chinese Bible. So you are my Elohim, and this is in effect a confession by Isaiah. And Isaiah is looking at the prophecies that ultimately, at the end of days, Israel will be saved, will be delivered by the hand of God, where the nations of the world will come to destroy Israel. Now, in this last passage that we have been duly reminded that at the very end, God will reign. He will establish his throne upon the temple on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. And with that view, Isaiah praises God. Says, You are my Elohim, not anyone else. And if you recall the Ten Commandments, or the Bible calls it the 10 statements, that God says, you shall not have any other Elohim before me. And so Isaiah is confessing, you are my Elohim, and I will exalt you. The word exalt you means to lift up high. Now, the idea of lift up, how do you lift God up on high? So, this, remember, Isaiah is speaking also a lot in terms of poetic language. When he says, I will exalt you, it literally means that I will raise you on high. And the whole idea of raise God on high is by his actions or speech. And by the actions of speech, it is literally placing God on a pedestal. So he would be saying things that exudes God as the highest. He would be saying things and using words that places God above all things. And that is what it means by lift God up on high. Then it says, I will praise your name. The idea of praise here is from the word yada. And the word yada has a similar idea. The word yada is to use the hands and lift up, right? The hands is lifted and it's pointing. And so this idea of lifting and pointing is the idea of thanksgiving or praise. Because the idea of praise is about God. The direction is to God, and the things that is said, the focus and the speech is towards God. And so this idea of you and your name, you find that they are equal, which means that we have an A and a B. I will exalt you, my God, and I will praise or your name. This would be the same. The name of God is very different from how we would call ourselves. The Chinese names have meanings similar to the Hebrew names. But more than that, in the Hebrew culture, the name is a memorial, something to remember by. It is something that describes the character. And so the character of God is the object of praise, the object of lifting up, the object of saying what is good beyond normal human terms. So I'm just trying to help us understand when the Bible says exalt and praise, it carries some very concrete meanings. So the name of God has been carefully used. It cannot be misused. And the name of God reflects God, his character. Do not lift up my name in vain. That's part of the 10 statements of the 10 commandments. So by exalting and praising, that is the right thing to do because, so this is the word because, you have done. And by doing, these are actions that God actually did. So in the previous chapters, we have seen what God has pronounced. And then eventually in history, even during the lifetime of Isaiah, things have taken place. The word wonderful here speaks about things which are extraordinary, right? Extraordinary. and it relates a lot to marvels of judgment. And so a lot of the prophecies, or what we call prophecies, that really speaks of destruction, of victory, of losses, of ruins, of devastation. Now, all of these are what we call wonderful things, extraordinary things with regards to judgment. And that in itself, in verse 1, encapsulates why Isaiah is praising God. And Isaiah is praising God because of what God has said, and then what God has actually done according to what he has said. The idea of wonderful things are things that we cannot explain. How did that ever happen, that God had decided way before time to destroy them, to protect the Jews? Now, all of these are things which, from Isaiah's viewpoint, humanly speaking, is incredible. And that's the meaning here. So, your advice of your counsels of all meaning from the past, which points to the prophecies, because they are always spoken long before they were actually acted out. And it says here, your counsels from long ago is actually true and faithful. Now, these two are similar words, right? Similar words from the same root word. Although the English seems to be seeing two different words, but they are very much one and the same idea. They are firm, right? True is from the word emet. What does that mean? Now, one of the things that we may not uh, uh, be able to appreciate is this: faithful and true comes from the same root word to mean firm. It means what is said actually came to pass. It means that whatever God has proclaimed or prophesied is sure. That's all same meanings. And so the counsels of God from old are true and faithful, because God says what he means and means what he says. And by that, we call God faithful. He made a promise and he honored it. For example, God made a promise to Abraham and then to Isaac and to Jacob that God will give his descendants the land that he is standing on. So 400 years down the road, they came back to the land and God gave them the land, but over 400 years. That is the faithfulness of God, because he said it and he will do it. And that is what it means by the counsels of old are faithful and true. Then it says here, you have made a city a ruin. You have established a city to a ruin. Basically, he has destroyed the city. This word ruin is not quite ruin. This word would be a heap. That would be uh, more closer to the Hebrew meaning. A heap, and it could be a heap of stones or a heap of dung. So, in a poetic way, it's saying God's power has destroyed the city into a heap. A fortified city would be a walled city into a ruin. Now, this idea of ruin uh, literally means something that has fallen. So the walls have fallen. A palace of foreigners to be a city no more. It will never be rebuilt. Now, this idea of a palace of strangers. You could say a palace of foreigners, of strangers. This word is these are non-Jews. People who came to the land, conquered the land, and built themselves towers. Not just palace, but towers, great, big, tall structures. And as part of a city, it will be a city no more. Now, this idea of a city no more is, I guess, it's a bit different to be expressed. It says here, literally, then you can actually translate yourself. Uh, not be built to Olam. Remember, I've always talked to you about Olam being walking to the horizon. It's usually translated as forever. But essentially is to tell us for a long, long time it will not be rebuilt. And so the text here says it will never be rebuilt. But in actual fact, the text is saying this will not be built for a long time. Now, how long is long? We don't know. That's as far as the Hebrew has left it. To say never would be an interpretation. Verse 3, therefore the strong people will glorify you. Now, this idea of strong people, uh, I guess we need a bit of explanation. These could be said as fierce people, strong people, fierce people who are mighty people. Then they will glorify you. Glorify you means place importance, honor. You have read the passage, honor your father and your mother. It's the same word as glorify. Basically, is to place importance, place weight on God. And the city of terrible nations will fear you. The idea of terrible nations. Terrible, I guess you could say, um, striking terror. Nations here will be Goyim, non Israel. So in the end of time, or in the end of days, when God is about to establish his throne, they are seeing that the Gog and Magog incident of Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 will play out to the point where the foreign nations will come and they will respect God. For you, God, have been a strength to the poor, a strength to the needy in his distress, a refuge from the storm, a shade from the heat. For the blast of the terrible ones is as a storm against the wall. Now, this word terrible ones, striking terror, same words right here. These are the terrible ones. They are the ones that will come and they will destroy. So God is said by Isaiah, because you have been a strength and he is there to protect. Who are these? These are the Jews who will face various phases of enemies: the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Medo Persians came to save them. And then after that, the Grecians, and then the Romans. And then after the Romans, there was nothing else until they are established in 1948. And they are still not in their own full abode. And so this particular chapter is describing what God has done, will do, and will be doing. You, God, will reduce the noise of aliens. These are strangers, non-Jews, who comes and attacks them. As heat in a dry place, as heat in the shadow of a cloud, the song of the terrible ones will be diminished, striking terror again. I think many of us will not appreciate people like the Assyrians, the Babylonians. If you had a chance to go to the British Museum and some of the other museums and read and learn about the Assyrians and the Babylonians, they are not friendly at all. And so, in wake of whatever they are seeing around them, Isaiah understands the plight, because at the time when Isaiah is writing, the Assyrians have already conquered the northern part of Israel, and they are brutal. They strike terror in the hearts of all men around. And we've gone through various chapters in the past few days, how they will come after Tyre, after Egypt, after many of these major kingdoms around Israel. And when they come into Israel, they will also devastate it. And in this mountain, that would be the mountain of God, that would be Jerusalem. Now, understand one of these challenges that when we read in the Bible, as in this word here, the word here is har. The word har is actually translated as hill, mountain, something that is higher up. And so please do not misunderstand when you talk about mountain, it is very much like the Himalayas. It's not. It is just a higher point because everywhere is flat, like wilderness and desert. And so the landscape rises up, and that high place would be a fort. And so God and Isaiah says, on this mountain, the Lord of hosts, Jehovah Tzevaot, will make for all people. Now, this idea of all people is for all people who comes to him. Isaiah chapter 2, right? Verses 2 to 4. And God will prepare a feast of fat. Choice pieces is fat, by the way. Uh, this is an interpretation. The word here is fat, shemen, right? And fat represents the best part. So whenever the Israelites sacrifice to God, and God has said in Leviticus chapters 1 to 7 that the fat belongs to the Lord. So fat is the best pieces, the best parts belongs to God. A feast of uh, a feast of wine on the lees, fat things full of marrow, well refined wines on the lees. The idea here is this is a very sumptuous feast, very poetic way. And then it says, and he will destroy on this mountain the surface of the covering cast over all people, the veil that is spread over all nations. This is about the protection of nations. And whatever is protecting them, it will be no more. So all this idea of the surface of covering, the veil that is spread, these are protection. And God will destroy all their rules, all their thoughts of how they should do things. And this is the principle that God is saying, that he will be king. The first word is over all the people. This is Amim and this is Goyim. This is very much at the time where there will be world peace. Now, obviously, it's not today, it will be sometime in the future, whenever that happens. Isaiah chapter 2.
Alternatively, this could be understood as follows.
I would think that it's pointing to the end, Gog Magog,
Mhm.
and God will actually prepare a feast for all the people. In a way, I guess you could say that when you read the Gog and Magog, there is a feast of the wild animals. Uh, and but in verse 7, at least verse 7 is a bit clearer that God will destroy whatever they have depended on for their own protection. Then it says here, and he will swallow up death. And it says forever. This would be perpetuity or continually. So it's not quite forever. And it says here, swallow is the idea of eliminate. So God will eliminate death or dying. So I guess you could say this dying. And the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces. The rebuke of his people he will take away from all the land. By the way, earth is land. For the Lord has spoken. So by this, we can see that it is about his people, Israel. So this psalm, not psalm, this chapter of Isaiah chapter uh, 25 really talks about the the Israel people and how God will deliver them and how God will protect them and what God will do at the end of days. And it will be said in that day. So every time you see in that day, it's sometime in a specific day or period, and it's future. Behold, this is our God. And really, it's sung by my people, and it is Israel. It says, we have waited for him and he will save us. This is the Lord, this is Jehovah, our Elohim. Exactly how Isaiah would express, we have waited for him. So the idea here is about anticipation, anticipation, hope, uh, longing for, and it's also an idea of looking eagerly. That is what it means. We have waited for him, we have waited for him, and we will be glad and rejoice in his deliverance. However, when you think about it, there are waves of enemies that came to attack them. And in each of the waves, until the time of the Romans in 135, Emperor Hadrian, they have cleared the entire land of Jews or Jewish speaking people. And so for over 1,000 years, there was no welcome of Jews in the land. And so successive peoples who are non-Jews have come into the land. And so this chapter really describes a lot of things about the time of Isaiah and into the future. For on this mountain, the hand of the Lord will rest. Every time you see body parts like this, it's not It is to depict a picture. The hand is the hand that does work. Does work would be creative work. It will be judging work, right? That all these are work. Will rest. Yanak will be quiet, right? Will be quiet. The hand will stop doing. The hand will lie down. The hand will be, uh, I guess you could say, will settle down, right? Settle down. So, what is the picture that the hand is given? The hand, instead of moving back and forth, which is action, the hand will be at rest. No motion. That's the picture that is given here. The hand of the Lord will rest. And then it speaks about Moab. And Moab, apparently, according to the Jewish commentators, will participate in the Gog and Magog attack of Israel, providing support and inroads from their side of the eastern part of the Jordan. And so it says Moab will be trampled down under God. Now, the idea of trampling down is really to stamp on it. So if you see, I guess some people would try to use their foot to stamp on ants. That's the idea of trampling. Just stamp and do it multiple times so that you can make sure that all the ants are dead. And a straw is trampled down from the refuse heap. What does this mean? See, you when they do their business, after they do their business, they would use straw, dried leaves to cover it so that at the end of the day, they stamp on it to be flat and it makes it part of the ground. And that is the idea of trampling. It's very imagery driven. He will spread out his hands in their midst. Now, this is the idea of spreading out hands. Now, the idea of spreading out hands here is to stretch out. Stretch out. You need to understand that the Bible does talk about stretching out. When you stretch out your hand, and this chapter says, as a swimmer reaches out to swim. So you're now looking at a picture, a swimmer about to swim stretches out his hand. Now, that picture here, you need to understand. It is about the stretching. It is not about the swimming. That's important for us to remember. It is about the outstretched hand. But by using the hand, you find that this is about God striking on Moab. He will bring down their pride together with the trickery of their hands. Their hands are the ones that is going to hurt Israel. And so God will spread out his hand to destroy them. Our last verse goes this way: the fortress of the high fort of your walls, he will bring down, lay low, and bring to the ground, down to the dust. Another very imagery driven, very poetic, talks about high walls of a city brought down to the ground in piles, and there's no more walls. So that's the intent. It's trying to show destruction. And this is what we call utter destruction, completely destroyed. So when God spreads out his hands like a swimmer, he is invoking judgment upon Moab. And that is how chapter 25 ends. And with this, we've come to the end of our session today.